First of all, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us. My name is Jamie Kidder. I am the National Outreach Director for College Living Experience, and we are so excited to have you with us today. Now, many of you know we host a variety of webinars throughout the year on topics that are really relevant to families of children with varying levels of need. Now, each event is designed to provide insight, resources, and really real world perspectives to help families navigate their child's transition to independent adulthood. And we'd love for you to stay connected with us at CLE and be in the know, if you will, about our future events, both virtual sessions and the exciting things that are happening at any one of our 8 centers, CLE locations around the country. You can follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. We are on all the socials for updates, upcoming events, and for resources. So before we get started, just a really few quick housekeeping notes. Now, because we have such a large group with us today, your cameras and microphones have been disabled, so our presenter has the spotlight, or if you will, in this instance, the screen. We will have time for Q&A at the end, so feel free to drop those questions in the chat as we go or save them for the end, jot them down, whichever works best for you, and Crystal will do her best to get to as many as we can. And today's event again is being recorded. So should you have to jump off and hit your workday again or take care of kids or dogs for in my case, please feel free to do so. I will be sending the link for the recording to all of the registrants by the middle of next week or so. So please feel free to pass that along to other families or professionals in your sphere of influence who may benefit from that conversation. So, having said all of that, I am really excited to welcome Crystal Herrington from Northwestern Mutual with us today, who will be obviously leading today's session. So, Crystal began her career in 2002 in the financial world, and in 2018, she was inspired by her son's journey and her own experiences as the mom of a child with special needs and shifted her focus to serving families with children who need some extra support. And today, Crystal leads a financial planning practice committed and dedicated to helping these families, just like yours, feel confident, prepared, and secure in planning for their child's financial future. So again, Crystal, thank you so much for being with us here today. And and for sharing all that you know with us, or maybe just at least what you can in an hour. Um,
Sure.
but without any further fanfare, Crystal, the screen is all yours.
Wonderful. Well, let me go ahead and pull up the presentation here. So we have something nice to look at here. Well, thank you again, as Jamie said, for being here. Hopefully, if you tuned in, you were hoping to learn a little bit more about creating financial security for your loved one with special needs. I feel like Jamie did a really good job of going over my bio, so we can maybe like skip over this part, which I normally go over. The only thing I'll just mention is that I am part of a team and we do help clients from all across the country. So whether you live in Texas, Colorado, California, or any of the other 50 states, we certainly can help you and work with you. If you have any specific questions related to your state's programs or anything like that, we can definitely help you or point you in the right direction. But let's kind of jump into why you actually came here today, because it's not about me, right? I always like to start by sharing some interesting statistics. I'm a numbers girl, and so I find this kind of really interesting, and I wondered too, like, how does this actually connect with what I actually hear from clients that I'm working with? And I feel like it absolutely lines up. So, based on this study, 82% of caregivers are concerned that they don't have enough financial resources to last their disabled relative's lifetime. So I hear this one all the time, particularly how it connects with the second bullet here, which is 77% of people feel like they can't retire. And I get this, right? I think when we have a child with special needs and we have this notion that, oh my gosh, like they may outlive me by 30 or 40 years. And if we think they're going to need some support or at the very least a safety net, right? Something to kind of fall into if they need help along that journey or along the way, that can be extremely daunting, right? I think most of us know we need to be saving money, putting away for retirement, maybe trying to eat healthy, take a vacation here or there. And all of that in and of itself seems fairly difficult sometimes, right? And then to add on that extra layer of complexity, like, oh my gosh, someone might outlive me by 30, 40 years, it's extremely daunting. So if you're feeling that way, any of these things that we've talked about so far, obviously you're not alone here. The majority of special needs parents or caregivers are feeling that way as well. The next one I'll mention is 87% are concerned about what will happen to their child with the disability when they, as in mom and dad, are no longer living. So I think this is the one that people, voice to me most regularly. And I get that. As a parent, I think we lose a lot of sleep in general, just worrying about our children, from day to day. But again, when we think about adulthood, I know for me personally, I wake up in the middle of the night sometimes in like a cold sweat, just panicking about, some future thing that I have really no control over in that moment, but it keeps me awake, right? So, very valid, very real concern. Now, the last two bullets here I think are the most interesting, and that's 67% of parents have not set up a special needs trust. Only 23% of families have a formal financial plan for their dependent, and only 37% are working with a financial advisor. So, what I'm gathering from all of this data is a lot of families or caregivers out there have a lot of concerns, a lot of fears, a lot of, worries, probably aren't sleeping all that great at night thinking about the what ifs. But for whatever reason, very few of them are getting help. And I don't know if it's because it's hard to find it or if it just feels like it's hard to access or it just feels overwhelming, right? Like I get that. Again, we're thinking about someone outliving us by 30, 40 years. That can kind of like put you into a paralyzing state. So I just wanted to kind of share all of that with you to say, I'm so glad you're here today because you're taking the first step, right, of not being part of that very last statistic there and having a very intentional, formalized plan, having a special needs trust if it makes sense for your family and, having that formalized intentional plan. So I just wanted to say thank you again for being here for that. And my goal today is to leave you with some clarity and direction. Because again, I find that this type of financial planning is very confusing and overwhelming for a lot of people. So I want to hopefully make it very clear on, how the pieces work. And then I want to provide you with some direction so that no matter where you are in your planning journey, you feel like you have a very clear next step. So that's my goal for today's presentation. But in terms of agenda, there's really kind of two big agenda points here. The first being building your team. So we are going to talk about who are the different professionals you're going to need on your team throughout this journey and kind of when does that relationship start? How does it look? So we'll dive into that. We're also going to talk about developing your special needs plan. So there's several components with that. The first being that you need to spend a little time kind of understanding your current situation and your vision for the future. Sometimes this is the hardest part and probably why, there are so few people who have a formalized plan because I don't know about you, but for me, most times I feel like I'm just kind of like surviving the day, right? Like trying to get through the day, get to the next therapy appointment, all the things, then do it all over again. So sometimes spending time really thinking about what do I want for the future or what is actually happening in my finances currently? Am I on top of that? Am I intentional or reviewing that on a regular basis? Sometimes those things kind of slip inside a little bit. So it does actually start there with understanding your current situation and your vision for the future, not only for yourself, but also for your child, right? What do we want for them and their future? Where do we want to provide as much independence as possible? That's usually what people tell me. But what would that look like, right, within your family dynamic? But the second part of developing your special needs plan is making sure that we're getting the benefits that your loved one is entitled to. So we are going to talk about some of the more, popular, not, that's probably not the right word, but the more well-known government benefits that are out there. We're going to talk about when should you apply and how do they work? How do we stay eligible? But I have to tell you, it's very common for me to run across a family who maybe applied at one point in time, got denied, and just never went back and applied. And they've left a ton of money on the table because they didn't really understand kind of how those roles work. So that's my goal today is help you understand that. And then attempting to estimate the future cost of care. That's also a very important piece that we'll spend a little time on. And then establishing and funding a special needs trust. I think, well, my goal with that is to help you understand what is a trust, right? What is the difference between that and a special needs trust? Why would I want that versus any other thing? But the one bullet that's not on here that probably should be is able accounts. We are going to touch on that. Because I know for a lot of families that we speak with at COLE, that's like the number one question we get is about able accounts and 529. So I'm definitely going to spend some time on that. Let's jump in. So building your team. Okay, so we feel like you're going to need three, if not four, professionals throughout this journey. The first being a financial planner or financial professional, a government benefits specialist, and an attorney. So I would encourage you, if you haven't worked with an attorney yet, if that's still kind of part of the planning that needs to be done, when you're looking for an attorney, just make sure that they do have some expertise in special needs trust fund creation or elder law. It is a very kind of nuanced and unique type of document. And so there are many estate planners out there that don't feel comfortable doing it. So you just want to make sure you find an attorney who has some experience with that, as you know, kind of like a decent size of their overall uh, business, right? That they do a fair amount of special needs planning. I would say the same is true for a financial planner. I probably need to update this slide and add that on there. Only because I've been doing this as long as I have, I've seen a lot of really amazing, very well-regarded financial planners out there who have all the credentials in the world give really bad advice to families who have children with special needs. Advice that we have to spend a lot of time and energy and sometimes get attorneys involved to unwind. So they can be very expensive and time consuming, all while losing access to government benefits. So you definitely want to make sure you have a financial planner who has some expertise in this area as well, just to make sure that that we're looking through the financial planning lens with your child and their future in mind. Um, Now then, the one person that's not on here, I said three, maybe four professionals. The fourth would be a CPA, right? And the reason I say that is because as special needs parents, we have a lot of special expenses that we pay. And a lot of these things can be considered a tax write-off as a medical expense. For instance, if you go to a special school and you're paying privately for that, that's technically going to be a deductible expense. But again, you would want your CPA to be kind of aware of the situation and make sure that you are maximizing those deductions. So let's kind of dig in a little bit and talk more about what do each of these professionals do and when do they come into the picture? So let's start with the attorney. So the attorney would be the professional that's going to help you draft the actual legal documents that you're going to need. So the will, potentially power of attorneys, guardianships, and then that special needs trust. So the great thing about an attorney is that you'll engage with them, you tell them what you want, they create it for you, you pay them, and then they leave the relationship, right? So that's a good, maybe not so good thing. It's not typically an ongoing relationship. Your attorney's never going to call you and say, "Hey, we did your estate plan 3 years ago. It's time to review it just to make sure it all still looks good." They're never going to do that. So what I would encourage you to do is when you set your estate plan up, whether you've done it yet or not, I would just say make sure you review it at least every 5 years. And the reason I suggest that is because the rules with Medicaid and SSI are changing, and they have changed dramatically over the last 20 years. And I can give you guys an example. We actually had a client that engaged with us. They had a special needs trust that was created 20 plus years ago. And they were like, we'd love just to have it reviewed and make sure it's still relevant. So we took a look at it, and it specifically said in that language that in no form or fashion can this trust ever pay for housing or food. And so I don't know about you guys, but for me, like that, those are the most important things that I want my son to have access to is a safe place to live and food in his body. Those are kind of like the minimums, right? And so this family had done a great job of creating a lot of assets and had a great funding strategy for this trust that would have likely not benefited this child much at all. Um, so that was, a great example of why you want to make sure you review them every 5 years or so, just to make sure that the language is the most up to date and inclusive, but also there's lots of roles that you're going to designate throughout these documents that you want to just make sure that those people are still the right people for the job. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But again, attorney it usually comes into the picture when you engage with them and then they leave. So that's something you would be in control of re-engaging. Okay, the financial professional. So I can't speak exactly to what every financial planner will do for their client. I feel confident most of them are helping with things like protection and growth. I think that's what, traditionally what you would think of with financial planning. So helping with things like life insurance, disability, or long-term care insurance. Or on the growth side, helping manage investments, tracking retirement, education, right? All of the different things that go with saving systematically over time. So those are very typical things that a financial planner will do for you. But if you're on this call today, you probably need one extra part of planning in addition to those others that we've talked about, and that's legacy planning. And as I mentioned before, oftentimes our kiddos, they could outlive us by 30, 40 years. And so having a plan for that, I think, is extremely important. I would say the most important would probably be a trust funding strategy, right? And so we talked briefly about how, um, part of doing this type of planning is estimating the future cost of care for the child. Meaning, if I left this planet today, how much actually needs to go into this trust to make sure that my son is going to be cared for the way I would want him to be cared for the rest of his lifetime, whether he's independent or not, right? If I want to just have a safety net there, or if I know without a doubt he's going to need support, what does that kind of look like? And then where's it going to come from? Right? So having a very strategic plan for that. And it could come from lots of sources, right? It could come from leftover retirement accounts or checking or savings accounts. It could come from a stock portfolio, right? Or it could come from proceeds of a life insurance policy. There's lots of different ways that this trust can be funded. But are we intentional about that, right? Do we know how much needs to go in and then exactly what asset is going to feed into that trust? So I think that's a really important part of the planning that we all need. The other piece I would say would be estate equalization. So we get this a lot when we have families who have multiple children, and maybe one has special needs and the others don't. So it is often important to a lot of families that when the parent leaves this earth, that things feel fair, right? But also equitable, that the individual with the special needs has the resources they need, but that we're not leaving everything to them and not leaving anything to the other siblings, right? So having an intentional plan around that, I think, is really helpful as well. Now then, the financial planner, that usually is an ongoing relationship that I would say your advisor should be meeting with you at least once a year, if not more regularly, depending on kind of the complexity. But that should be an ongoing relationship, lifelong, hopefully. Okay, government benefits specialist. So this is, if you were going to DIY any of these pieces, I would say this might be the one you could maybe DIY, meaning do it yourself. But again, I have just seen so many families who have tried to go that route and, didn't understand, how the form needed to be filled out or that there's certain documentation that needs to be included and they didn't get approved and got really frustrated and just kind of like didn't didn't move along with it and have left resources on the table. So if you are kind of in the mindset that you'd rather leverage a professional to help you through that process to make sure you have a better, higher likelihood of a successful outcome the first time, then there are government benefit specialists out there that can help you. And this usually comes in when we're applying for benefits like SSI, SSDI, or Medicaid, whether that's the Medicaid waivers through the state or local programs or whatever it might be, right? But Um, that person can usually help you fill out the forms and will follow it through until it's completed. So anyway, again, that person usually comes into the picture around the age of 18, typically, and it's not usually an ongoing relationship. We might re-engage with them if there's some kind of a snafu that happens, and we get into a situation where there's a back and forth between SSA and we might need some extra help, then we might re-engage. But usually, age 18 is when that professional comes in. Now then, the last box at the bottom, other professionals and resources, things like doctors, teachers, therapists, public and private programs. I find in just being a special needs mom myself that it's really easy actually to find great referrals for all of the people in this box here, right? Like you can talk to your friends or neighbors, or if you're in any of the like social media groups, people will rave about, oh, I need this. They'll say, oh, you need to go to that doctor or this therapist or whatever. But I find it's really hard to find recommendations to attorneys who have expertise in special needs planning, or to find a recommendation to a government benefit specialist or a financial planner. So if you're sitting there today thinking, I need one of these people, but where do I find them? Let me know. I've got referrals I can send you. Again, in all 50 states, we have attorneys and government benefit specialists that we can connect you with, if that is an area where you feel like you need to kind of like guide your attention. So hopefully that's helpful. But let's move in now and let's talk about government benefits. So we get a ton of questions about these. So again, I want to hopefully demystify some of this for you, and help you understand what are they and how do they work. So we'll start with SSI, or Supplemental Security Income. And this is considered a means tested program, meaning that to qualify for this, you have to be within a certain income and asset requirement. And so I'm going to actually ask you to divert your eyes to the bottom of the page here, just to start with. And let's assume that our child is a minor at this point. So they are under the age of 18. And we're wondering, should we apply for SSI? So to keep it simple for today, it's actually pretty hard to qualify for SSI when your child is a minor. There's a calculation involved, and they're going to look at the parent's income and assets, as well as the overall household size to determine eligibility. So, again, to keep it simple, if we have a dual income household, so mom and dad are both working, and we're making roughly $3,000 a month, we're probably not going to qualify, right? So, it's actually very hard to qualify when our kiddo is a minor. However, up at the top of the page, if our kiddo is an adult, so now they're 18, then the rules change and they're no longer going to look at mom and dad's income and assets to determine eligibility. They're just going to look at the child's personal income and their personal assets. So this is where, again, we usually bring that government benefit specialist in at age 18 so that we can apply for SSI. But there are a couple of things to keep in mind here. So the first is we can't have more than $2,000 in assets in our child's name, right? $2,000 is the limit. So I see this happen sometimes where mom and dad may have set up a little checking or savings account or a teen account, right? And they've been putting money in there systematically and they built up a couple $1,000s and they feel really good about it because they're saving for their child's future. But if their name is listed, the child's name is listed on the account, then SSA is going to view that as a resource and it would be counted against them. So something to keep in mind there. Now, I do get questions a lot about 529 college accounts. Um, Technically, that should not count against them because the way that that account is set up is mom and dad are actually the owners of the account, or mom or dad or grandma, grandpa, whoever set the account up, right, is the owner of the account, and the child is the beneficiary. So it should not count against them. However, I have heard of some horror stories here or there where someone in SSA doesn't quite understand the rules and has considered that as a countable asset, but just know it's not supposed to be. Um, but anyhow, but we just can't have more than $2,000 in the kiddo's name, right? And then in terms of income, and this is going to be a little bit state specific. I know California actually has a little bit of a different rule on resources as well as income. It's a little bit higher. But It's pretty similar in all the other 50 states or 49 states. But in terms of income, we have to be below roughly $1,620 a month of their own personal income to still qualify for at least a partial benefit here. Now then, if you're like, well, what does it even do, right? What is SSI? So it actually provides a monthly income of $967 a month as of right now in 2025. That will probably change next year. Um, but in some states, it's a tandem benefit along with Medicaid. So if they weren't already receiving Medicaid health benefits, once you qualify for SSI, Medicaid would kick in automatically, right? And for some families, candidly, like that's the more desired benefit is access to Medicaid. Especially as our children age out and get beyond age 26, if we're worried that they're not going to have access to income or, excuse me, jobs that are going to provide health insurance options, then Medicaid is often a really, really valuable benefit that we want to make sure we're protecting. Um, Hopefully that's helpful. Again, just keep in the back of your mind, 18 is the magic age to start applying, and can't have more than $2,000 in our name in most states and 1620 of income in most states. I guess if you guys have any questions on SSI, you can go ahead and throw them into the chat, and I'll be sure to try to catch them as we go along, but certainly address them at the end of our call today. Okay, moving on. So the next benefit that I think is really valuable and worth mentioning is it's called the Retirement Social Security Benefit. It's called lots of things actually. You might have heard it called SSDI. Sometimes it's called RSDI. Sometimes it's called DAC, which stands for Disabled Adult Child Benefit. All of those things are a little bit different, but essentially work the same. And the way that it works is at the time that we start drawing Social Security in retirement as the parents, right? If our child had a disability prior to age 22, documented medically, then they will be entitled to a benefit equal to half of our benefit. So, as an example, let's say I'm retired and I'm receiving $3,000 a month from Social Security, then my son would receive a benefit equal to 1,500. Okay. Now my 3,000 is not impacted in any way. I'm still going to get my full 3,000. He's just going to get an extra 1,500. Now, I usually get a ton of questions, so I'm going to try to answer them before you guys have a chance to ask them. But the first question is, can they draw off of both mom and dad's record at the same time? And unfortunately, no, right? We can only draw this benefit off of one parent record at a time. It is possible to start on one parent record though and jump to another parent record, but we can only do one at a time. So usually we're going to choose the higher of the two, right? Now, the next question I get asked a lot is, will my child get SSI and SSDI at the same time? Can we like stack these benefits that we've talked about? And the answer to that is probably not, right? There are some situations where there would be a dual benefit situation, but in most cases, once we transition to this benefit here, SSI is eliminated. Now, I'll give you a quick example of where we might have both. So let's say that I was self-employed and my CPA did a really good job of keeping my income really low for tax purposes, right? And so when I look at what I'm going to receive from Social Security, I'm only going to get $1,000 a month from Social Security. Well, in that example, my son would only get 500, right? And so because the 500 is below what he would have gotten through SSI, he would still then get a partial SSI benefit, right? But generally speaking, once we move over to this, SSI falls away and we're now on this new benefit here. Now the next question I get asked a lot is, well, what happens to Medicaid when we switch from SSI over to SSDI? And right now, there's a 2-year window of time where the child would still be eligible for Medicaid health benefits while they're on this new benefit here, the SSDI. So they'll still have Medicaid for 2 years. And then after that 2-year period of time, they would switch over to Medicare. There we go, Medicare insurance. So it is designed to always have access to some type of health care, whether it's Medicaid or Medicare. There should not be a lapse in those types of coverages. Now, and some families tell me too, when that transition happens, it's actually a blessing for some of them because there are many more providers who will accept Medicare versus Medicaid, right? And so sometimes that's a very desired outcome is to kind of get switched over. But again, it is designed to always provide some level of income and some level of health insurance benefit. Okay, the last question I usually get asked is, well, what happens if I die? Right? They're getting 50% of my benefit, but if I'm not here, what happens? So it actually, in that example, would jump up to 75%. When a parent passes away, they get a survivor benefit. That's that RSDI. And that is equal to 75% of that parent's record. And the child will then keep it indefinitely, right, for the rest of their lifetime. So, in a nutshell, that's kind of how this benefit here works. A couple of things just to remember and keep in the back of your mind. We do have to have a disability documented medically prior to age 22 to be eligible for this benefit here. And yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I missed on this one. Again, if you guys have questions, throw them in the chat. Happy to answer them as we move along or at the end. But my point in kind of showing you these two slides is to help you understand really the true value here of these programs, right? $1,000 a month we would roughly would get through SSI plus Medicaid. Here on the SSDI side, it could be a benefit much higher than that and access to Medicare insurance. So these are really valuable programs. We've tried to figure out what is the true value of these if we were to quantify it in a present value number. And based on our, very conservative assumptions, we estimate it to be worth about $1.5 to $2 million in resources over the person's lifetime. So very valuable and certainly worth understanding how it works and protecting, right? So moving on, let's talk about developing a special needs plan. So again, if we think our kiddo is going to be eligible and need access to those programs we just talked about, then we definitely need a special needs trust because that is one of the only ways we can preserve access to these programs, um, especially when there is a transition of wealth from one generation to the next, right? So that was my nice way of saying when we die and we leave what we own in this world to our children, the only way we can do that and still keep them eligible for government benefits is if we do it in a special needs trust. Okay, so what is a special needs trust, right? Or I guess like what is a trust in general? Because I get a lot of questions about this. And I think a lot of people think that a trust is just some type of an account that you open up at the bank. And it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. Um, so a trust is an actual legal document that you would create with the attorney where you're basically creating a new entity. So you're like creating this new like invisible person, if you will, or it's kind of like opening a business, right? This like entity that is you've created. And this entity can own anything that you personally could own, right? So it could own a mutual fund portfolio or a retirement account. It could own a home. It could own proceeds of a life insurance policy, right? All of the things that you personally own, it can also own. Now then, because the trust is what's owning these things, it's not in the child's name. And that's how we're able to stay eligible for those programs. But one thing I guess that's really important to understand is that the child would be listed as the only beneficiary of this trust. So no one else can have access to the money if they want it or need it for anything, except for the child with the disability, right? So they're the only beneficiary. So that is one thing that, that I think is important to understand is like, what is it? How does it work? But also, why a special needs trust? Why can't it just be any other type, right? Like, why can't it just be a family trust or this revocable living trust or whatever, whatever words you've heard before, right? So a special needs trust has very specific language written into it that essentially says we can't ever give money directly from the trust to the child, right? So I use this fun example. Like, let's say that we want to take a trip to Disney. Great, we can do that. And if we have, money in the trust, the way that would work is the trust would need to pay for the hotel directly. The trust would pay for the flight directly. It would pay for the tickets directly, right? And then when we get there, if we want to like, have breakfast with the princesses or lunch with the Marvel characters, whatever it is we're going to do while we're there, it's going to need to pay that directly, right? In a special needs trust, we would never be able to say, okay, kiddo, here's $5,000. Go have fun in Disney. We can't do that. And because we could never give money directly to the child, SSA does not determine that as a available resource, right? And that's the important part. So it absolutely has to be a special needs trust. Um, now, I usually get questions about, people have heard words like first party versus third party. What does that mean? So, ideally, what you would want to have set up is what's called a third party special needs trust. All this essentially means is that whoever owned the asset before it went to the trust was someone other than the beneficiary, right? So my husband and I, we own these things. We list our son's trust as the beneficiary, so it goes straight from us to the trust. That's third party. Now, first party is like, let's say that we didn't do any planning, right? And we had a lot of assets. We listed our son's name directly, and he inherited all of these resources. What would happen in that example is whoever's helping our son would have to go hire an attorney to create a trust at that time. And they would have to work at retitling all of those assets to be as the trust as the owner, right? But once we do that, that's fine. We're back in business for government benefits, right? But now, because my son owned those assets, it's considered first party, right? Because he owned it before it went into the trust. Now, the biggest thing to remember about the difference between first and third party is what happens to those remaining assets when the child passes away. So if it's in a first party trust, and again, this is going to be a little bit state specific, but generally speaking, if there's anything left in that first party trust when the child passes, Medicaid could take it. If you live in Texas, Medicaid is definitely going to take it, right? So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Whereas if it's a third party, right? So my husband and I owned it, it went directly to the trust, never went through my son's name, then we get to maintain control over what happens to those remaining assets. So we can leave it to a sibling, or we could even leave it to a charity of our choice, right? We could leave it to CLE. We could if we wanted to. So it just provides more control over those remaining assets. So hopefully that was all you ever needed to know or wanted to know about special needs trust. Again, if you guys have questions, please throw them into the chat. But I'm going to go ahead and move on because if you haven't set this up yet, I will just let you know that when you do sit down with the attorney, they're going to want to know who you want to list as certain roles, right? They're probably going to ask you about who do you want to be the executor. They may ask you, do you want to have a successor guardian? And they may ask you, who do you want to be the trustee? So a lot of times people get very confused of what does that mean? Are those all the same thing? Are they different? They're actually different. So, an executor would be the person that's in charge of making sure that your will is being executed as it's written, right? So, if in your will you said, I have this really wonderful, this is actually a true story. My great grandmother had this shell collection that as a young person I was obsessed with. Like she had the most beautiful shells. I don't know where she got them from, but I mean when I would go visit her, I couldn't stay away from the shells. So in her will, she wrote that I received her shells when she passed away. So the executor would be in charge of making sure that the shells made it to whoever they were designated for, right? Um, so that's an example of what the executor's job is. Now, a guardian is a person or entity that's in charge of decision making over another person. So they can help decide where's that person going to live, medical decisions over that person, right? So they're essentially making all of the day-to-day decisions for another individual. And then last but not least, a trustee. So the trustee is a person or entity that's in charge of managing the assets and the administration of the trust. So again, if we have multiple accounts in here, they're in charge of making sure that the assets are being invested correctly. They're making sure that we're buying the flight to Disney and to, the airport, all of the things. They're the ones who are paying the bills, paying the monthly rents if we need to do that. All the administration, which also includes filing tax returns, right? So, very separate roles. Now, it's not to say that you couldn't choose one person to be all of those roles, but they are very separate roles, and doing different things. So, when it comes to a trustee, I will say that is a very big responsibility, to be a trustee over a special needs trust in particular, because that's often going to also require reporting back to SSA on benefits and things like that, maybe even doing accounting for the courts if there's a guardianship situation going on. So there's a lot kind of involved with that. And I just want you to understand you do have options here. So when you're thinking about who do we want to maybe be the trustee, you could certainly choose a family member or a close friend. I think it's very common for a sibling to be listed as a trustee. That's perfectly fine, especially if they have a very close relationship. You can also choose a co-trustee relationship where you have multiple people. Maybe there's a family member and maybe a family friend, right? I've seen one example of this that worked really well where they chose a sibling and then there was a family friend, who was a CPA, and they really wanted the family friend to be part of this because she had more experience on filing tax returns and things like that, whereas the sibling was very closely related to like the day-to-day of what the individual needed, right? And so together they worked very well. I will tell you though, attorneys tell me that's their least favorite arrangement because it does open up the potential for conflict. But I think if you're strategic about who you pick, it should be fine. And then last but not least, there is what's called a third-party corporate trustee, where you can essentially hire a bank or a trust department to handle all of this for you, right? And so these are people who wake up and they go to, that's their job, 8 to 5 every day. It's handling trust. And so, um, personally, that's what we chose for our planning for our special needs trust is we chose a corporate trustee just because I felt like that was a really big responsibility, right? And we're all here today because we're trying to learn this and figure this out, how to not mess it up, right? For government benefits and things. So imagine being just like thrown the baton and say, don't mess it up, right? It's just kind of like a big responsibility. So there are those options out there. And again, if that's something that you're like, wondering more about, let me know. I can definitely connect you with some really great corporate trustees, from across the country. All right, moving on. Again, if you have questions about trustees, throw them in the chat. Able accounts, save the best for last. So if you haven't heard of able accounts, they're still fairly new. They've only been around for a little over 10 years or so. And they were created when Congress authorized each individual state to essentially create a tax-free savings account or a way to save for individuals who have special needs. So the only way you can have an ABLE account is if you have a documented diagnosis. And right now it's as of prior to age 26, right? So if we have a medical diagnosis prior to age 26, we can qualify for an ABLE account. But I think there's a couple of benefits here, right? The first being that it's a tax-free way to save. So we can put money into this account, it can be invested, it can grow over time, and when we pull it out, we'll never pay tax on the gains. So it looks and smells a whole lot like a 529 college account. And that's for a reason because it technically is a 529 account. And the tax code 529C stands for college, and that's what most people think of. But there's also a 529A, which is for able. So they're the same. The biggest difference is a college account can only be used for education. An ABLE account can be used for anything that's going to create a better life experience for that individual. So that certainly includes education, right? But it also includes some things that a college account might not cover, like an aide who's going to be there to support, or um, certain types of transportation if that's needed. Lots of things. I mean, truly, there's nothing I can think of that we couldn't use ABLE accounts for. Um, some maybe not tobacco and maybe not alcohol. Although someone did challenge me that on that the other day when I said that, because they said, well, what if it's their 21st birthday? And I was like, oh, well, then we might be able to do the alcohol. I don't know, right? It's kind of on the honor system, but we can really use it for anything. So it just kind of opens those dollars up. Now, a couple of things here, though. There are some limitations on it, so we can't have more than $100,000 in the account. Otherwise, it would then be considered a countable asset. So that's the other benefit I didn't mention. We can save into this, and it's not going to count against them for SSI or Medicaid, right? So I told you before, we can't have more than $2,000 in our kiddo's name unless it's in a special needs trust or in an ABLE account. Those are the only two ways we can have money set aside for them that won't count against them, right? But with the ABLE account, there is that limitation of 100,000. Here's just a list of what we could use ABLE funds for: obviously education, housing, transportation, employment training and support, assistive technologies, health, prevention, all the things. Anything that CLE is going to cost, we can use ABLE funds for 100%, right? So this next slide here is actually my favorite slide of the whole presentation because this shows you side by side how an ABLE account is the same and or different than a third-party special needs trust. And we did this intentionally because we have a lot of families who will ask me, which one do I need? Like, should I only do an ABLE account or should I only do a special needs trust or do I need both? Right? And so I think for most of our clients, we recommend that you have both because they work a little bit differently and solve kind of different needs, and they both have different limitations and things like that. So let's kind of walk through this together. In terms of eligibility, for an ABLE account, we do have to have that disability recorded prior to age 26. Okay. That rule is actually going to be changing next year. They're bumping it up to 46, but as of today, it's 26. With a special needs trust, there actually is no age limit. So we actually have some clients. This one woman comes to my mind, she's in her 50s. She has autism, but it was never officially diagnosed in her medical records as a child, right? Because back then it just wasn't, really, they just didn't know as much about it. And so technically, she doesn't have an official diagnosis, certainly not before age 26 in her medical records. But she is still eligible for a special needs trust. So, in terms of setup, an ABLE account, very easy to do. You can do it on your own. In fact, one of the resources that I'm going to send you for registering today is a link to the ABLE Analyzer, which will take you to a website that looks like a map, and you can click on your state's ABLE program, and you can look at all of the features of it and decide if is this the program we want to do or not. I will say if you're in a state, if you live in a state that has a state income tax, then you absolutely need to do your state ABLES program because there will be a way for you to get a tax deduction from the state income tax. But if you're like me and you live in a state like Texas, we don't have a state income tax. So there's really no benefit of using my state ABLE program. So I can actually kind of pick and choose and look around at all of the different programs and decide which one do I want, right? But that is going to be something that we're going to send over to you guys. So you have a way to look into that. And if you hone in on which one you want, it'll take you directly where you would go to open the account. Okay, in terms of a special needs trust, though, we definitely need to go through an attorney for that. The attorney is going to need to draft all of that for you. In terms of a contribution limit for ABLE accounts in 2025, the maximum you can contribute is 19,000. And that's going to be on a calendar year basis. So we have until December 31st to get those contributions in to count for 2025, and 19 is the maximum. They've already let us know next year in 2026, they're upping it to 20,000. So you can do a total of 20 for the year. And in a special needs trust, there's no contribution limits. Let me take a quick second though, because again, a lot of the calls we have gotten from CLE families, it is all about 529s and ABLEs. So one thing I wanted to let you know is if you did set up a 529 college account and you're wondering, is there a way to shift this over to an ABLE account? Yes, you can. You can shift the money from the college to Enable, but we are limited to the contribution limits for the year, right? So we for 2025 we could only take 19,000 from the college and put it into the Able. But then in January we can do another 20, right? But that is a possibility. You can do that. Okay, account balance. Able account, $100,000, or it's going to be considered a countable asset. So, a special needs trust, no maximum. We could have $1 billion in there. That's perfectly fine. We're not going to have any challenges with government benefits. In terms of uses, so an ABLE account, like I said, the definition is anything that's going to create a better life experience for the individual. So it could certainly be used for housing, education, all of the things, and it will not affect SSI in any way. A special needs trust, there are some kind of like funky rules here. Technically, if we are on SSI and we're paying for housing from a special needs trust, there could be a reduction in SSI benefits. Candidly, that almost never happens. Um, because it's actually fairly rare to have an individual who has SSI and a funded special needs trust kind of at the same time. Usually, when that happens, they're already on SSDI, right? Because that means a parent has passed away. And so we're on SSDI and SSI rules no longer apply. But there is kind of a funky thing there, just something to be aware of. In terms of taxability, ABLE accounts are tax-free, right? We love a tax-free anything. With the special needs trust, though, there are no tax favors. So, as I mentioned, this trust can own anything, right? And if the asset that lives in this trust was going to create a taxable event, we're going to have a taxable event. We can't, there's no way around that. In fact, the tax rates inside of a trust are often accelerated if we're not careful. So, again, that's something that you would want to have an intentional conversation with your financial planner about is being strategic on what asset are we leaving to the trust. And if we have multiple children, maybe we don't leave everything evenly to all the children. Maybe we pick and choose what asset goes to the trust versus what goes to another child individually in terms of the tax implications. Um, Remaining assets, here's a big one. So the ABLE account looks a whole lot like that first party special needs trust that we talked about. Remember, first party means that the child owned the asset before it went into the trust. So SSA thinks of that as their money. And when they pass away, Medicaid could take it. Same is true in an ABLE account. Medicaid could take it. Now, there are several states that have waived this requirement, but the vast majority will go after it. And one thing I do tell my clients too, who live in those states um, with the waiver on that, is that would be a very easy first step that a state could do to try to get more money if they needed more money, is take that waiver off. So I would almost just kind of think and plan that they probably will at some point want to come after those ABLE dollars if there's anything left in there, right? Third party trust, though, it passes to family members. We have control over it because remember, that's third party. So someone other than the beneficiary owned it. And then last but not least, ease of access. So the ABLE account, it's very easy. You can actually get, most of them come with debit cards that you can give to the individual and they can use it right at the point of purchase. So going back to our example of going to Disney, remember, the trust is going to pay for the hotel, the flight, our activities while we're there. But let's say we're there and our kiddo wants a souvenir or they want to have a snack while we're there, right? They want to buy food that we didn't prepay for. Well, then they can use their ABLE card for that. So it's very easy to access the funds and, create a sense of independence, right? Which is what I think the ABLE account was really intended for. So with that, I think a very common strategy for a lot of trusts that are already funded is we might take a distribution of the trust of like the 19,000, which is the maximum we can do, and put it over into the ABLE account for the year, and that kind of frees that up for things like this, right? If the child wants to go to the movies with their friends or whatever, right? They have access to their money through that debit card. Um, Whereas in a special needs trust, things have to go directly from the trustee, right? Hopefully that was helpful. Again, this is my favorite slide of the whole presentation. Because I think it really clearly shows you how they're the same and how they're actually very different. And again, I usually don't recommend that our clients get really aggressive about opening up an able and using it as an aggressive like funding strategy or savings strategy. I think almost everyone should have an able account, but more as a pass through, right? If we're passing 529 college dollars through to pay other things, if we want to take money from the trust, put it into the able so that the child can use their debit card for certain things, or if we, grandma doesn't get the memo and leaves $5,000 to our child, we need a way to get that money out of their name quickly. We can always plop it over into the able account, right? So hopefully that's helpful. We are running up on our time here. I'll just quickly recap. I do feel like you need a team, right? This is a very complicated type of planning. I love a good DIY project, but I don't think this is one of those things it takes a team actually. The financial planner, the government benefits specialist, and the attorney, and then also potentially a CPA. And then in developing your special needs plan, just make sure you take a little time and understand your current situation and your vision for the future for not only you, but also for your child. And then make sure you're getting those benefits that you're entitled to. If you applied at some point, got declined, that doesn't mean that you're not going to qualify again at some point in the future. So engage with a government benefits specialist. And then attempting to estimate the future cost of care. I think that's something that we do a really great job of, is really helping you not only on those first two parts of financial planning, the growth and protection part, but also on the legacy piece and helping you estimate future costs of care and coming up with that intentional trust funding strategy. And then establishing that special needs trust. Again, that's where the attorney comes in. So I'll skip through that. They just make me put it in there. But where do we go from here? So I am going to send you all lots of good stuff, lots of goodies. We're going to get you what's called the special needs planning checklist. No matter where you are in your planning journey, this will give you some things to think about. Um, and it'll be a good for the person who's thinking maybe we already have it all taken care of. You'll know without a doubt if you check yes on all of these boxes, right? Like we're good. But if we can't do that, then we know we still have some pieces we need to work on. I'm also going to send you what's called a letter of intent. This is a great document where you can write down and list all of the things that are really unique but important about your child's care, right? For me, I'm kind of the primary caregiver for our son, and so all of the therapy appointments and doctor schedules and medication things, that's all in my brain. My husband would be lost without me. So this is a place for you to write those things down so that another caregiver, if they need to fill your shoes unexpectedly, has everything they need at their fingertips. We're also going to send over the slides, and then kind of an addendum to that is the Beyond One Day at a Time brochure, which gives you a lot of context of the slides, right? So what is SSI? What is SSDI? What's the difference between a first and third party trust? It's all in there. And the last but not least, the link to the ABLE Analyzer. So be on the lookout for that email from us. We are going to send that over to you, whether you attended or just registered, you're going to get it. And then we are offering everybody through CLE the option to do a comprehensive financial plan with us that includes that quality of life estimate or that cost of care, right? For no cost, right? We've decided to waive that planning fee for anyone who comes to us through CLE. So I think it's a really great strategy, something that you can just have some peace of mind knowing, are we on track? And does our current financial plan have consideration for our child, both now, but also while we're gone, right? Do we have an intentional plan there? So if that's something you're interested in, please let me know. I'm not going to be badgering you. You're going to have to let me know you want to do it. You can just email me and we'll find a time to get you on the schedule. With that, it's right at 1 o'clock. I'm proud of myself, but I'm happy to stay a little late if you guys have questions. Please throw them in the chat. I don't see anything in the chat as of right now.
I actually, Crystal, there are quite a few questions, and I know
Oh,
because we are bearing down on time.
yeah.
I have put all of those into another document.
Okay.
If participants are okay, can we answer all of those questions in email format? and then
Definitely.
send the questions and their subsequent answers out to everyone. If you guys
Yes.
want to kind of give me a thumbs up in the chat, that would be great. If that's okay with you, that way you can all see the questions and the answers. There were a lot of really good questions that I
Yeah.
think would definitely be pertaining to a lot of families that have logged on. So, Crystal, if
Yeah.
that's okay with you, can we do that?
Absolutely. Yes. I'm
Okay,
actually really excited to answer these questions. So
great.
absolutely.
I'll put them in a format that will be
Okay.
easy for you to decipher, and then you can add the questions or the answers, and we'll get those sent out to everyone.
Wonderful.
Um,
Wonderful.
That is great. Well, Crystal, of course, as always, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us today. And to everyone who logged in, thank you for spending a part of or all of your lunch hour with us. We hope you're leaving with a really clear understanding, or at least a clearer understanding of financial planning options and some of the really useful steps that Crystal mentioned and is offering through her practice. So, just as a quick reminder, we recorded the event, and I will be sending this link along with Crystal's contact information. And again, she'll be sending out presentation content to all the registrants, hopefully by the end of next or by middle of next week. So feel free again to pass that along to any families or other professionals in your network who might benefit from the information that was shared today. And of course, if you'd like to learn more about college living experience and how we support young adults on their journey to independence, or you want to connect with one of our team members directly, we'd love to hear from you. You can reply to the follow-up email that I'll be sending out next week, or you can always visit our website at experiencecle.com. And remember, we are on all the socials. I think that's so cool. Again, what did we do without Zoom? And what did we do without social media? Who knows? So stay tuned for more webinars just like this one. And once again, thank you so much, Crystal. I love working with you. And thanks to everyone who joined us, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Okay, bye
Bye.
everyone.